I'm here to present this project, which is the Altona North Primary School. It's the first stage of a four-stage redevelopment of the school, $2.6 million, and it's a classroom building. It's located in Altona North, which is an inner west suburb of Melbourne, and it's a dormitory suburb that was created in the mid-20th century for the nearby industrial areas. As such, the school kind of consists really of what's typical to projects of that time, which is the LTC or light timber construction buildings, which are generally kind of corridor buildings, double loaded with classrooms and notorious for roof leaking, of which these projects were, or these buildings were also containing, along with a whole bunch of other end of life kind of problems. So the master plan was really to demolish and rebuild the school. Now that said, the school was really fond of those buildings. They were fond of the kinds of spaces of the classrooms. They were fond of the corridor space they used tentatively as an informal learning area, and they were very fond of the courtyard that ran between the buildings. So the master plan kind of maintains that courtyard, modifying and also retaining the axial kind of entry into the site. And also here, trying to meet a desire from the school for the new project to make some kind of sign towards this busy arterial and Massons Road down on the southern side of the site. So our project, which is the first stage of the four-stage redevelopment, it became clear through the consultation that there was an opportunity here to explore the design potential of their hesitancy to change and their desire for legacy. So in many ways, this project is about taking that familiar LTC classroom building type and addressing its pedagogic limitations and its monotonous extrusion. So we sort of started with that central hall, or corridor as it was, and sort of looked to expand that into a centralised learning hall, augmenting that space and enlarging it with alcove spaces and timeout spaces. And also revisiting the rather static arrangement of the classrooms and shifting them to allow more of a kind of diagonal arrangement between the spaces across that hall, allowing for team teaching, but also for individual classrooms. So sort of a process of kind of together and partners. And you can kind of see that in the plan there. So the slip plan is 6 classrooms, and then bookended by admin, the computer area, consultation spaces, and the AP's office. Now, that central corridor space, there's sort of tension between a dynamism associated with bringing team teaching together and also an idea of retaining control. So this idea of bringing an overlay of calm to this busy space. And these two projects were quite influential in that way. Corbusier's church for that chapel, for that sort of soft skylit space. And this project on the right-hand side by Sakamoto, where the kind of occupied area is anchored to the floor for this kind of consistent material use. And you can see that in the corridor where we've used that for the bag hanging area and into the alcoves. And then looking the other way, where you get kind of views back into the classrooms, this sort of monitoring back and forth of the space from the classrooms adjacent. The second idea was to take that kind of sectional extrusion of the building and modify it to bring a specificity and also variation to the learning spaces. And introduce a kind of third space, which is sort of like a threshold between indoor learning and outdoor learning. So you can see here a kind of typical section of an LTC building, and that was kind of segmented and mapped onto the elevation. So that kind of together and apartness of the individual classrooms represented as a figure on the outside. But also they're sort of starting to do this thing with the sign of the building to create a kind of silhouette that references that kind of industrial sawtooth roof of which the suburb was built to serve. And a misalignment between the classrooms and that roof above creates in the cross section, as you can see, quite individual classroom spaces that you can also see across here in the long section, and particularly in the reflected ceiling plan, that each classroom is a kind of an individual outcome of a similar situation and relationship between the plan and the roof. And here's one classroom here, and then another one. And the more dynamic spaces of the classrooms kind of centralised control of the teacher, allowing the kind of introduction of colour. And that diagonal arrangement itself extending further outwards to set up a kind of relationship between those internal spaces and the outdoor learning areas and the roof, which is sort of the main kind of steel thing that I want to be talking about for the back end of this presentation. You kind of see that sort of steel roof, but almost like draping, like a veil over this warm, exposed aggregate concrete, which itself is a kind of reflection of the external materials of the building. And those external materials of the building are kind of like the last layer of the design of the project, this idea of legacy. both in terms of bringing elements of that surrounding and changing fabric of the suburb, but also the opportunity to actually reuse the materials from that suburb as they're demolished on site, that I'll get to in a second. And then where those materials might be exhausted, but how you infill the rest of the building, but the way in which a ruin is kind of repaired, which to me sort of had a kind of relationship to almost like a redacted text, where the redaction matches the form of the thing, but there's no fidelity to the original detail. So this, which is the elevations of the building, kind of bring those two things together. So at the top, you've got that kind of veil of spandex, solid and perforated for sun screening, draping down on top of the brickwork. The brickwork, a combination of that sort of fringing decoration between each of the entries, and then linking those entries together, kind of striation of recycled bricks from the suburb, tracked to a Tottenham site, brought back and laid as a kind of striation of redevelopment. One house runs out, so the next one starts. And then those areas of redaction provided by cement sheet cladding here, here, and down here. Now, bringing this all together required very comprehensive, I guess, sort of bringing together of steelwork detailing, and a few things to kind of maintain the robustness of the compliance with the VSBA requirements, so external eaves, gutters, so forming them up in steel so they're hidden behind the screen, that veil could read more strongly. And then also using transfer structures to sort of broaden out and remove columns from underneath this sort of canopy onto an adjacent pergola structure that you can see there. So that's a sort of moment that I was just showing here, where this is sort of extended out. So you kind of release the kind of connection to ground and maintain that lightness of the roof folding over the top. And there's all those sort of materials together, the brickwork, the redaction, and the folding down of the roof. And the, what's that? Yeah, cool. And I guess there's there, you can see again that kind of emanation of colour across from the brickwork and outwards, and that folding around and underneath into the eave spaces. You can see here there's maximised eave space allowable under the VSBA requirements, providing that sun shading during the day. And really during the day, that's the area where you can kind of see that brickwork up close as you enter the building. But at night, that's when that situation starts to change, where it starts to reverse, and where you go from sort of quite solid silhouette to something that's more revealing that story that's being told in the building, that kind of bringing that sign outwards into the evening. A story about a school and its suburb. Thanks.